Let me begin with a truth that might make you uncomfortable. Motivation is unreliable. It feels powerful in the moment, like a spark. You watch a video, attend a seminar, read an inspiring quote, and suddenly you believe you can change your life overnight. But here's what happens next. Monday comes. The alarm rings, the excitement fades, and the very thing that felt unstoppable yesterday feels optional today. That's because motivation is emotional, and emotions are temporary. You don't need more motivation. You need structure. You need discipline. You need a system that works on the days you don't feel like it. Motivation asks, do I feel inspired? Discipline asks, what did I commit to? And that difference changes everything. We live in a culture addicted to inspiration. We binge watch transformation stories. We highlight quotes. We say, this time will be different. But nothing changes because we never build the muscle that sustains change. Discipline, not restriction, but self-respect in action. Discipline is choosing your future over your mood. Now, I know what you might be thinking. I've tried to be disciplined. I start strong. I quit. That's because most people try to overhaul their entire life in one day. They aim for perfection instead of progress. They depend on willpower instead of design. So tonight, I want to give you something practical, not hype, not theory, a reset, a 7-day discipline reset that actually works. Why 7 days? Because 7 days is short enough to commit to and long enough to prove to yourself that you can change. Here's what happens when you follow a structured reset. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop chasing feelings. You start building identity. Because real change is not about what you do once. It's about who you become through repetition. When you wake up early even when you don't want to, you become someone who keeps promises. When you exercise despite resistance, you become resilient. When you complete tasks without applause, you build internal strength. And something powerful happens. You stop needing motivation. You begin operating from standards instead of moods. Discipline creates clarity. Clarity creates confidence. Confidence creates consistency. And consistency, that's where transformation lives. Let me be clear, discipline is not about being perfect. You will miss days, you will feel tired, you will doubt yourself, but discipline says, I start again. That's the secret. Not intensity, but return. The most successful people in any field are not the most motivated. They are the most consistent. They don't wait to feel ready, they act, and readiness follows. And here's the part most people miss. Motivation feels good. Discipline feels strong. One gives you a temporary high. The other gives you a permanent identity shift. So if you've been waiting to feel like stop. If you've been saying, next month, I'll start now. Not with 10 habits. Not with a dramatic life change, just with 7 days of intentional discipline, 7 days of keeping small promises, 7 days of showing up, 7 days of doing what you said you would do. Because when you prove to yourself, even for 1 week, that you are capable of discipline, something inside you changes. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries. You start seeing yourself as someone who follows through, and that shift, it's life-altering. Tonight, don't look for motivation, look for commitment. Don't chase inspiration. Build structure. And remember this, you don't need to feel powerful to act powerful. You act powerful, and then you become powerful. Your life doesn't change when you're inspired. It changes when you decide. Let's begin with a powerful truth, the kind that changes how you see your own behavior. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings are temporary. You can feel excited on Sunday night, ready to change your life, energized by a podcast, a speech, or a breakthrough moment, but by Tuesday morning that energy has shifted, and suddenly the same goals feel heavy. That is not because you are weak, it is because you are human. Motivation rises and falls. It depends on mood, environment, sleep, stress, and even the weather. It is emotional fuel, and emotional fuel burns quickly. That is why motivation fails. We have been taught to wait for it, to chase it, to depend on it. But the truth is this, if your success depends on how you feel, your success will always be unstable. Discipline, however, is not emotional. It is a decision. A decision says, I committed. Even when your mood says, not today. A decision does not negotiate. It does not ask whether you are inspired. It simply asks whether you will honor your word. And that is where power begins. Because the moment you shift from feeling-based action to commitment-based action, your entire life changes. Think about it. How many times have you said, I'll start when I feel ready? Ready is a feeling. Strong is a feeling. Confident is a feeling, but progress is built on behavior, not emotion. Discipline means you wake up when the alarm rings, not because you feel energized, but because you decided the night before. It means you complete the workout, not because you feel motivated, but because you promised yourself you would. It means you sit down to work even when distractions are louder than your focus. This is not about harshness, it is about integrity. When you rely on motivation, you are at the mercy of your emotions. When you rely on discipline, you are anchored in your standards, and standards create stability. The most successful individuals in any field are not the most inspired every day. They are the most consistent every day. They have learned that feelings fluctuate, but commitments remain. And here is the deeper truth. Every time you act without waiting to feel like it, you strengthen your identity. You are not just completing a task. You are reinforcing a belief about who you are. You are telling yourself, I am someone who follows through. And that internal message matters more than any motivational speech, because identity drives behavior. If you believe you are disciplined, you act disciplined. If you believe you are unreliable, you hesitate. So the shift is simple but powerful. Stop asking, do I feel motivated? Start asking, what did I decide? That question alone will change your mornings, your habits, and your results. There will be days when your energy is low, when doubt whispers, when comfort calls louder than growth. Those are not signs to stop. Those are moments to practice discipline. And discipline is a muscle. It grows stronger every time you use it. The first few days may feel uncomfortable because you are breaking a pattern of emotional dependence. But by day 4, day 5, day 6, something changes. You begin to trust yourself. You begin to see that you can act independent of your mood. And that realization builds confidence deeper than any burst of inspiration ever could. Motivation makes you start. Discipline makes you continue. And continuation is where transformation lives. So remember this, your future will not be built on the days you felt inspired. It will be built on the days you did it anyway. That is the power of decision. That is the strength of discipline. And that is why motivation alone will never be enough. Let us go deeper into something most people misunderstand. Discipline is not punishment. It is not restriction. It is not a rigid life filled with denial. Discipline is self-respect in action. And that distinction changes everything. When people hear the word discipline, they imagine pressure, force, harsh routines, and exhaustion. But real discipline is not about controlling yourself through fear. It is about honoring yourself through standards. It is the daily evidence that you value your future more than your temporary comfort. Self-respect is not something you declare. It is something you demonstrate. It shows up in how you manage your time, how you protect your energy, how you keep your promises, especially the promises no one else sees. Because the truth is, the relationship you have with yourself sets the tone for every other relationship in your life. If you constantly break your own commitments, you quietly teach yourself that your word does not matter, and that erodes confidence. But every time you follow through, even in small ways, you reinforce trust within yourself. You begin to believe, when I say I will do something, I mean it. That belief builds strength from the inside out. Discipline is waking up when you said you would, even if the bed feels comfortable. It is choosing nourishing food when convenience tempts you. It is finishing the task when distraction whispers that you can do it later. It is saying no to what weakens you and yes to what strengthens you. And here is the important part. Discipline is not about perfection. It is about alignment. Alignment between who you say you want to be and what you actually do. If you say you want success but avoid effort, there is misalignment. If you say you want growth but resist discomfort, there is misalignment. Discipline closes that gap. It aligns your actions with your aspirations. And when alignment happens, clarity follows. You no longer live in internal conflict. You no longer battle guilt from unfinished goals. You no longer depend on external validation to feel accomplished. because your discipline becomes your proof. Think about the quiet power of this. No applause, no spotlight, no recognition, just you making a decision that honors your long-term vision. That is self-respect. It is easy to love yourself when you feel confident. It is powerful to respect yourself when it is hard. Self-respect says, I deserve better than my excuses. It says, my future matters. It says, I will not abandon myself when things feel inconvenient. And the more you practice discipline, the more your internal dialogue shifts. Instead of saying, I hope I can, you begin saying, I will. Instead of saying, maybe tomorrow, you begin saying, now. Discipline builds internal authority. It removes negotiation. It reduces emotional chaos. It simplifies decision making. When you have standards, you do not debate with yourself constantly. You act according to principle, not impulse. And that reduces stress, because much of our mental exhaustion does not come from hard work. It comes from indecision, from repeated internal arguments, from starting and stopping, from promising and postponing. Discipline eliminates that noise. It creates structure. It creates stability. It creates momentum, and momentum creates belief. Over time, you begin to see yourself differently, not as someone who wishes, but as someone who executes, not as someone who talks about goals, but as someone who moves toward them. That identity shift is profound, because confidence is not built through affirmations alone. It is built through evidence. Every disciplined action becomes evidence. Evidence that you are capable, evidence that you are reliable, evidence that you respect yourself enough to show up. So understand this clearly. Discipline is not about controlling your life. It is about elevating it. It is not about deprivation. It is about direction. It is not about rigidity. It is about responsibility. And when you begin to see discipline through the lens of self-respect, it no longer feels heavy. It feels empowering. It feels intentional. It feels strong. Because at its core, discipline is you choosing your future self over your present mood again and again until that choice becomes who you are. One of the biggest misconceptions about success is that it comes from grand gestures, from sudden breakthroughs, from one massive effort that changes everything overnight. We watch movies, social media, and inspirational stories that make it seem like transformation happens in a single moment, but real life is rarely cinematic. It is incremental. It is the accumulation of small, consistent actions. Consider this: a person who wakes up 30 minutes early every day, reads a few pages, exercises for 10 minutes, or writes down one reflection is doing far more overtime than someone who tries to overhaul their life in one single, exhausting day. Consistency compounds, just like interest in a bank account. Every small action may seem insignificant in isolation, but when repeated daily, it grows into habits. Habits build character, and character shapes destiny. That is why so many people fail after their initial burst of motivation. They rely on intensity instead of consistency. They believe that if they work hard for 1 week, 1 month, or even 1 day, they have done enough. But life does not reward sporadic brilliance. It rewards disciplined repetition. Small actions are powerful because they are sustainable. They do not demand massive energy. They do not rely on willpower alone, and they are easier to execute even on difficult days. When you commit to small actions, you remove the psychological barrier of overwhelming tasks. You remove excuses, and you create momentum. Momentum is the hidden secret of all high achievers. Momentum is not flashy. It is quiet. It is subtle, but it is unstoppable. Imagine brushing your teeth, watering a plant, or taking a short walk every day. Those are simple actions, but they form a rhythm, a sense of reliability, a trust in yourself that you will follow through. The same principle applies to bigger goals. If you aim to write a book, don't pressure yourself to write a chapter in one sitting. Start with 500 words a day. If you aim to get fit, don't force a 2-hour workout that leaves you sore and demotivated. Commit to 20 minutes daily. These small actions build your identity as a person who does what they say they will do. Over time, identity becomes ingrained. You stop needing motivation because the habit becomes automatic. The difference between failure and success is often invisible. It is the consistency of effort. It is the repeated, almost mundane choices that nobody sees. And that is why occasional intensity fails, because it is unsustainable, exhausting, and dependent on emotion. Small actions, by contrast, are anchored in discipline. not mood, and discipline, as we know, is what transforms life, not motivation. This principle also applies to mental resilience. Facing challenges daily, even in small ways, prepares you for bigger challenges. Every small action is a vote for who you want to become. Every skipped day is a vote for excuses and stagnation. The most successful people are not those who push themselves hardest in one moment. They are those who show up again and again, even when they don't feel like it. They build their lives piece by piece, brick by brick, through small, consistent actions. This approach also reduces stress and prevents burnout. When you rely on massive effort, you exhaust your mind and body. When you rely on small, steady steps, you cultivate endurance, confidence, and joy. And here is the most important part. Small, consistent actions teach patience. They teach trust in the process. They teach that transformation is not immediate but inevitable when you act intentionally. So if you want change, don't chase dramatic breakthroughs. Chase small victories every day. Show up consistently, even imperfectly, and over time, the compounding effect of your disciplined, consistent actions will create extraordinary results. Remember, the difference between a dream and reality is not giant leaps. It is the commitment to take small steps every single day, even when it feels ordinary, even when it feels slow, because ordinary consistency builds an extraordinary life. One of the most overlooked truths about discipline is that your environment has a far greater impact on your behavior than sheer willpower ever can. We like to think that success is all about self-control, that if we just push ourselves hard enough, if we just muster enough determination, we will always follow through. But the reality is, willpower is limited. It is like a muscle that tires when overused, and when your surroundings constantly demand attention, pull on your energy, or tempt you to stray, your chances of staying disciplined diminish dramatically. The environment you create becomes a silent partner in your success or failure. It either supports your habits or undermines them. Look at the small details. They matter more than most people realize. The kitchen counter cluttered with junk food, the phone buzzing with notifications, the messy desk filled with distractions, the bed that feels too comfortable in the morning. All of these are environmental cues that trigger automatic behaviors that often work against your goals. On the other hand, an organized workspace, a clean and calm room, a visible planner, healthy food ready to eat, and reminders of your priorities create an environment that naturally encourages discipline. When you remove friction and barriers, actions that support your goals become easier to take, almost automatic. If you want to write every morning, don't leave your laptop buried under clutter. Place it where it is inviting, open, ready to use. If you want to exercise, lay out your shoes, clothes, and water bottle the night before. If you want to eat better, stock your kitchen with nutritious options and remove processed snacks from sight. The environment becomes a system that nudges you toward consistency, reducing the need to rely on temporary feelings of motivation. Another important aspect is social environment. The people you spend time with influence your habits far more than you often acknowledge. If your circle supports procrastination, doubts your goals, or normalizes distraction, it becomes harder to act with discipline. If your circle encourages growth, celebrates consistency, and models the behaviors you want to adopt, it becomes easier to stay on track. Environment is not just physical, it is emotional and social too. It is the energy you immerse yourself in, the media you consume, the conversations you engage in, and the cues your mind picks up constantly. The key is intentional design. You cannot control everything, but you can design your space, your schedule, your social circle, and your media consumption in a way that supports the person you want to become. The discipline reset is not about forcing yourself to act against chaos. It is about creating conditions where acting with consistency feels natural. Willpower alone will fail, especially on tough days. But when your environment works for you instead of against you, discipline becomes effortless. Not because you suddenly have more strength, but because you have fewer obstacles, clearer choices, and stronger cues. Think about it. The most productive, disciplined individuals are not superhuman. They are strategically designed. Their morning routines, their workspaces, their schedules, and even their social interactions are intentionally shaped to support their goals. They remove temptations, reduce distractions, and build triggers that make disciplined action automatic. This is why motivation alone is unreliable. You can feel inspired for an hour, but if your environment constantly contradicts your goals, that inspiration is quickly erased. Discipline thrives in an environment aligned with your intentions. It does not rely on luck, willpower, or perfect conditions. It relies on preparation, structure, and intentionality. So the question is, what does your environment say about your priorities? Does it support who you want to be, or does it keep you trapped in old patterns? The small adjustments. A tidy desk, a clear schedule, supportive friends, reminders of your goals, compound over time, and when your environment is designed to make success easier, discipline becomes a natural extension of your life. It no longer feels like a battle, it becomes the path of least resistance, and in that space, consistency flourishes, habits solidify, and transformation becomes inevitable. Perhaps the most profound insight in the journey of discipline is this: lasting change does not come from behavior alone, it comes from identity change. Most people approach goals the wrong way. They focus on what they want to do rather than who they want to become. They say, I want to exercise. I want to write a book. I want to be successful, and they try to force their behavior to match these desires. But behavior without identity is fleeting. You can work out for a week, write a few chapters, or complete a project and feel proud temporarily, but without the underlying shift in how you see yourself, it is unlikely to last. True transformation begins with the question, who do I want to be? Not just what do I want to achieve? Well, because identity drives behavior far more reliably than motivation ever could. When you identify as someone who is disciplined, every choice you make aligns with that identity. Even when you don't feel motivated, when you see yourself as a writer, you open your notebook. Even when inspiration is low, when you see yourself as a healthy person, you choose nourishing food. Even when cravings whisper, every action becomes evidence of who you are, and that evidence reinforces your identity. This is why small, consistent actions are critical, because they are the building blocks of identity. Each day you honor a commitment, you reinforce, I am someone who keeps promises. Each time you show up for yourself, even when it is inconvenient, you reinforce, I am someone who values growth. Over time, these repeated actions solidify your self-perception, and when your identity shifts, habits become natural, almost automatic. You no longer need to struggle against yourself because your choices are aligned with who you believe you are. This is the ultimate power of the 7-day discipline reset. It is not about intense effort for a week. It is about creating a chain of actions that tell your brain, this is who I am. An identity change is self-reinforcing. The more you act in alignment with your desired self, the more you believe it, and the more you naturally behave that way in the future. On the other hand, if you try to force behavior without changing your identity, resistance will always be present. You will procrastinate, skip workouts, avoid tasks, and feel frustrated with yourself. Identity mismatch is exhausting because every action becomes a negotiation, a battle, a question of whether you feel like it. But when identity and action are aligned, life becomes simpler, smoother, and more sustainable. You begin to make decisions effortlessly because your internal compass has shifted. You no longer ask, should I do this? You ask, does this align with who I am? This subtle shift changes everything because the habits that last a lifetime are not built on external rules or temporary motivation. They are built on a deep internal conviction of who you are. Every choice, every repetition, every small act of discipline reinforces your identity, and every failure becomes a lesson rather than a defeat. Identity-based change also empowers resilience. When you face challenges, when motivation fades, when circumstances are difficult, your identity carries you forward. You act not because it is easy, not because you feel like it, but because it is who you are. And this is why even 7 days of intentional, disciplined action can spark lasting transformation, because 7 days is enough to begin shifting your self-perception, to plant the seeds of identity change, and to create momentum that continues long after the reset is over. So remember, lasting habits are not built on willpower, they are built on identity. Your actions follow who you believe you are. Change your identity first. Act consistently, reinforce it daily, and the habits, results, and life you desire will naturally follow. Because real transformation does not ask, "Can I do it?" It asks, "Who am I?" And then everything you do confirms the answer. As we wrap up this journey together, let's remember the essential truth: motivation alone will never sustain change. It is fleeting, emotional, and unreliable. It may give you a spark, but it cannot carry you through the days when life feels heavy, when energy is low, or when doubt creeps in. Discipline, on the other hand, is a decision, a commitment, and a practice that builds strength far beyond temporary feelings. It is self-respect in action, small consistent steps that accumulate, and an environment intentionally designed to support your growth. The 7-day discipline reset is not a gimmick or a shortcut. It is a framework to help you take control of your life in a structured way. It shows you that change is possible when you act intentionally, even for just 1 week. It demonstrates that habits are built not on fleeting motivation, but on repeated action, and that identity precedes lasting transformation. When you see yourself as someone who follows through, who keeps commitments, who prioritizes growth over comfort, your actions naturally align with that identity. You stop negotiating with yourself, you stop relying on feelings, and you begin to operate from principles, standards, and internal strength. And that is where true power lies, not in inspiration alone, but in the quiet, consistent, disciplined actions that shape who you are. So do not wait to feel ready, do not chase fleeting motivation, and do not rely solely on willpower. Instead, commit to 7 days of disciplined action. Design your environment to support your goals. Take small, consistent steps every day and focus on becoming the person who naturally embodies the habits you desire. Because when identity, action, and environment align, transformation is inevitable. Remember, your future self is waiting not for motivation, but for the disciplined, intentional choices you make today. Start now, act consistently, and watch as your life begins to shift one disciplined day at a time.